On a warm afternoon in the heart of West Africa, the air is heavy with both celebration and a sense of urgency. Rows of young graduates stand tall in their crisp white shirts, eyes fixed on the man who now holds the future of Burkina Faso in his hands. President Ibrahim Traore is not here to simply congratulate them on passing one of the most important academic milestones of their lives. He has come to hand them a mission, one that could define the survival and destiny of their nation. Burkina Faso is at war. Not just the kind of war fought with rifles and in the dusty villages along its borders, but a war of narratives, a war of information, and a war for the very soul of its people. In this tense moment of history, Traore's message is clear. The youth must not only know their past, they must live it, protect it, and be willing to sacrifice for it. He speaks of immersion patriotique, a bold and unprecedented program that will place these young graduates directly into the current of national history. They will learn the stories of their ancestors who fought to keep their lands free from foreign domination. They will study the geopolitics of today, understanding why their nation is under attack and how outside powers, hidden behind their carefully polished words, seek to manipulate and weaken them. This is not a gentle invitation. It is a call to arms in the purest sense. As the president's voice cuts through the crowd, he reminds them that the revolution underway in Burkina Faso is not optional. It is the path forward, the only way to catch up after years of being held back, and the only way to prevent the country's wealth from falling once again into imperialist hands. For these graduates, this moment is both an honor and a burden. They are the first generation to enter adulthood under Traore's revolution, and the weight of history now rests on their shoulders. The Immersion Patriotique program is not a ceremonial gesture or a symbolic tradition. It is a deliberate restructuring of how Burkina Faso shapes the minds and hearts of its future leaders. President Ibrahim Traore presented it not as an academic supplement, but as a shield, a training ground, and a moral compass for the generation now stepping into adulthood. For decades, the country's educational system followed a framework that, while producing skilled professionals, often failed to deeply connect students to the struggles, victories, and sacrifices that built the nation they live in today. Traore believes that without a rooted understanding of history, the youth remain vulnerable to manipulation, especially in an age where information is weaponized and external powers see African youth as the easiest point of infiltration. In the program, graduates are not simply taught the dates of wars or the names of heroes. They are immersed in the living memory of their people. They hear about the brutal campaigns waged against African societies by colonial armies, the systematic efforts to erase local culture, and the resilience that allowed their ancestors to survive and reclaim independence. This historical grounding is paired with an unflinching look at current events, especially the ongoing conflict within Burkina Faso's borders, where armed groups and their shadowy sponsors seek to destabilize the state. The president frames the present struggle not as a random wave of violence, but as the continuation of a centuries-old pattern where external actors attempt to control resources, governments, and narratives. Young graduates are taught to question the origin of every piece of news, to analyze the motives behind every international statement, and to see how social media can be used to erode unity from within. The curriculum emphasizes discipline, integrity, and solidarity, values Traore repeatedly names as the foundation for a new type of citizen. These qualities are not presented as abstract virtues, but as practical necessities for national survival. The same way a soldier needs endurance or a farmer needs fertile soil. Alongside lectures and discussions, participants take part in community service, working in hospitals, schools, and development projects to understand firsthand the challenges faced by their fellow citizens. In doing so, they develop both empathy and responsibility, seeing that patriotism is not only expressed in moments of crisis, but in daily acts that strengthen the social fabric. Traore warns that the enemy is not always visible in uniform or marked on a map. Sometimes it is a persuasive voice online, a familiar-looking organization, or a tempting offer that slowly shifts loyalty away from the homeland. By confronting these realities openly, the program seeks to inoculate the youth against the subtle forms of recruitment and betrayal that have historically undermined African independence movements. This approach stands in sharp contrast to many educational systems influenced by external models, where global perspectives are encouraged but national identity is treated as secondary. For Traore, the balance must tilt in the opposite direction, ensuring that every young Burkinabe carries a strong sense of belonging and purpose before engaging with the world. The hope is that this deep-seated awareness will create a generation immune to manipulation, one that sees through the polished language of foreign aid when it hides political strings, and one that can negotiate with the world from a position of dignity rather than dependency. In essence, the immersion patriotique is designed to be both armor and compass, protecting the youth from ideological infiltration while guiding them toward a vision of Burkina Faso where education, health, and food security are guaranteed for all. By setting this as the standard for national development, Traore places a clear responsibility on these graduates, reminding them that the revolution is not an event but a sustained transformation that requires their active participation from this day forward. The emotional peak of President Ibrahim Traore's address comes when he speaks of forging a new type of citizen, one who embodies discipline, loyalty, and an unshakable willingness to sacrifice for the nation's survival. This is where his voice hardens, not with anger, but with the gravity of someone who knows the stakes, as if he is speaking across generations rather than to a single crowd. He frames the present moment as a historical turning point where hesitation could mean the loss of everything the country has fought to preserve. The idea is not merely to graduate young people into jobs, but to transform them into living pillars of the revolution, individuals who will resist both the visible enemy on the battlefield and the invisible one in the information space. This call resonates strongly within Burkina Faso, especially among families who have lost loved ones to the ongoing conflict. For them, the president's words are not political theater but a reflection of their daily reality, a validation that their sacrifices are part of a broader national struggle. Among the youth, there is a mix of pride and intimidation, a realization that their adulthood will not be defined by personal ambition alone, but by a collective responsibility that could demand their full commitment, even their lives. Outside Burkina Faso, the reactions are layered. In neighboring African nations facing similar instability, Traore's initiative is met with cautious admiration, as leaders recognize the value of cultivating patriotic resilience in a generation heavily exposed to foreign influence. However, in Western political circles, the program is viewed with suspicion, painted by some as an attempt at indoctrination that could alienate Burkina Faso from its traditional international partners. Media outlets aligned with these perspectives often emphasize the militaristic tone of Traore's language while downplaying the social and cultural components of the program. This selective framing mirrors the very kind of manipulation the president warns his people about, reinforcing his point that narratives can be shaped to serve external interests. On the streets of Ouagadougou, the capital, debates unfold in markets, cafes, and family gatherings. Supporters argue that no country under siege can afford a neutral education, that survival demands a deep connection to national identity. Critics, though fewer in number, question whether the emphasis on sacrifice and discipline might suppress individual freedoms or creative thinking in the long term. Traore's allies within the government counter these concerns by pointing to the dual nature of the program, which combines historical and ideological education with practical skills for community building and self-sufficiency. For many ordinary citizens, the proof will come not from speeches but from the actions of this first generation of graduates. If they emerge as principled, resourceful leaders who can resist both corruption and foreign manipulation, the program will be vindicated in the public eye. If, however, they fail to live up to the ideals set before them, the credibility of the entire revolutionary vision could be at risk. Internationally, security analysts note that Burkina Faso's approach is unconventional but strategically sound for a nation under hybrid threats, those that blend military pressure with psychological and informational tactics. In Washington, Paris, and Brussels, there is recognition, even if unspoken, that a population educated to resist foreign influence poses a challenge to traditional geopolitical leverage in the region. Whether this will lead to open diplomatic friction or a quiet recalibration of relationships remains to be seen. For now, Traore has succeeded in creating a moment where the youth of Burkina Faso are confronted with the reality that their future is inseparable from the fate of their nation, and that their education is no longer just about personal advancement, but about ensuring that the country's sovereignty is not a relic of the past, but a living, defended truth. The long-term civil and political consequences of the immersion patriotic program are already beginning to take shape, even before its first graduates have completed their training. On a societal level, the most immediate impact is the strengthening of communal bonds as young people from different regions, ethnic groups, and social backgrounds work side by side in service projects and historical studies. This shared experience fosters a sense of unity that transcends local divisions, something that is critically important in a country where insurgent groups have exploited such fractures to gain influence. Communities that have often felt ignored by the central government now see young graduates arriving to help in schools, clinics, and infrastructure projects, turning abstract patriotic ideals into tangible acts of service. This visible commitment builds trust between citizens and the state, reinforcing the belief that the revolution is not merely a political slogan, but a participatory movement. Politically, the program sends a clear message that the government is prioritizing national resilience over dependency on foreign aid or intervention. This shift challenges decades of governance shaped by external economic and political pressures, signaling that Burkina Faso intends to chart its own course even if that means straining relationships with traditional partners. Supporters argue that this is a necessary step toward true sovereignty, as no nation can claim independence while relying on others to define its development priorities. However, critics warn that such an approach could isolate Burkina Faso on the international stage, potentially limiting trade, investment, and diplomatic support at a time when the country needs resources to fight insurgency and rebuild. Domestically, the program could redefine the role of education itself, integrating civic duty and national defense into the core curriculum. This could produce a generation of leaders who view governance not as a career but as a service, reducing the appeal of corruption and personal gain. Yet, there are risks. If the program becomes overly rigid or politicized, it might stifle dissenting voices and suppress legitimate debate, leading to a political culture that values loyalty over critical thinking. Such an outcome could undermine the very freedoms the revolution claims to defend. International observers are watching closely, some with genuine curiosity, others with clear apprehension. Human rights organizations express concern that a program so deeply tied to state ideology might blur the line between civic education and indoctrination. In response, the government emphasizes that the curriculum includes open discussions on governance, social justice, and the role of the citizen in holding leaders accountable, insisting that the aim is to produce independent thinkers grounded in their national identity. The potential ripple effects across West Africa are significant. Neighboring countries grappling with similar security threats may be inspired to launch their own versions of such programs, creating a regional shift toward education models that prioritize sovereignty and self-reliance. This could, in turn, alter the balance of influence in the Sahel, reducing the strategic leverage historically held by former colonial powers. Economically, a generation trained to value local development over foreign dependency could spark new industries, agricultural reforms, and resource management strategies that keep wealth circulating within the country. Yet, the challenge will be sustaining these gains without external funding, especially in sectors where Burkina Faso still lacks technical expertise. If the government can combine patriotic education with strategic international partnerships that respect national sovereignty, it may chart a middle path that preserves independence while engaging constructively with the world. In the end, the civil and political consequences of the immersion patriotique will depend less on the words spoken at its launch and more on the actions of those who live its principles. If they embody discipline, integrity, and selfless service, they will validate the vision of a Burkina Faso that stands on its own terms. If they fall short, the program could be remembered as an ambitious but flawed experiment in nation-building during one of the country's most turbulent eras. From a U.S. perspective, the Immersion Patriotique program offers both a mirror and a challenge. For many Americans over 60, The concept of uniting an entire generation under a shared mission recalls the mobilization efforts during World War II, when young men and women were called to serve in ways that went far beyond the battlefield. It also evokes the national debates of the Vietnam era, when patriotism and dissent collided in a struggle to define the country's identity. In both cases, the United States understood the power of shaping public sentiment and civic responsibility through education, media, and national service. Yet in the modern American context, the idea of a state-led patriotic curriculum might trigger concerns about ideological control, especially in an age when political polarization already fuels mistrust toward institutions. Strategically, Washington must recognize that programs like this in Burkina Faso are part of a broader shift in Africa toward asserting sovereignty in the face of competing global powers. By teaching its youth to question foreign narratives, Burkina Faso is signaling that it will not accept information or policy prescriptions without scrutiny. This could limit the soft power influence of the U.S. and its allies in the region, forcing them to engage with West African nations on more equal terms. Globally, the initiative is a case study in how small nations can use education as a tool of national defense in the 21st century. It demonstrates that warfare is no longer confined to physical borders, but extends into the realm of ideas, where loyalty and perception can be decisive factors. China and Russia may see in Traore's approach an opportunity to support a government that resists Western influence, while European nations could view it as a troubling sign of diminished leverage in their former colonies. For neutral observers, the program raises important questions about the balance between fostering unity and preserving individual freedoms, a debate that resonates far beyond Africa. Ultimately, whether the United States chooses to view the immersion patriotique as a threat to influence, a model for civic renewal, or a neutral expression of national sovereignty will shape its future relationship with Burkina Faso and, perhaps, the wider Sahel. President Ibrahim Traore's address to the young graduates of Burkina Faso was more than a ceremonial speech. It was a declaration that the nation's future rests in the hands of those willing to defend it at all costs. Through the Immersion Patriotique program, he is attempting to forge not just skilled workers or educated citizens, but guardians of sovereignty who understand their history, recognize the strategies of manipulation, and can resist the temptations of dependency. The message is clear. The revolution is not a passing moment or a political trend. It is a long-term transformation that demands discipline, unity, and sacrifice from every generation that claims to love the homeland. For older Americans who remember eras of national mobilization, there is a familiar echo in his words, the sense that education and civic responsibility must be deeply intertwined when a nation is under existential threat. Yet the stakes in Burkina Faso are uniquely urgent, a country battling both physical violence and the quieter, more insidious wars of information and influence. Traore's vision challenges his people to think beyond personal ambition, to measure their lives by what they contribute to the stability and dignity of the whole. Whether one views this as inspiring leadership or an ambitious gamble, there is no denying the scale of what he is attempting. If the graduates he now addresses become leaders who protect their resources, strengthen their institutions, and pass on a proud and independent identity to their children, then the Immersion Patriotique will be remembered as the cornerstone of a new Burkina Faso. If they falter, the program may become a cautionary tale of how good intentions can be undermined by the pressures of global politics. For now, the choice lies in the hands of those standing before him on that warm afternoon, carrying the weight of history on their young shoulders. Do you think that President Ibrahim Traore's national reform strategies are truly effective? Yet, please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traore. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines.